They said she died of a broken heart, but the autopsy told a different story. It happened in the fall of '93, in a forgotten Texas town where neighbors still nodded from across the street, and everyone knew what kind of coffee their mailman liked. A town where nothing ever happened until something did. Something so horrifying, so unspeakable, that people still lower their voices when they talk about it. A woman was found dead in her own home, naked, bruised, torn apart. Her husband claimed it was an accident, that she had been fragile, sick maybe, just gone too soon. But behind the peeling wallpaper of that modest little house on Maple Drive, there was a secret buried deeper than the foundation itself. A deal made in desperation. A betrayal that crossed every sacred line. And one question that still haunts anyone who hears the story: what kind of man sells his wife to pay a debt? And what kind of monster buys her? Eddie Miller had always been a man of quiet desperation, the kind of man you wouldn't notice in a crowd, who tipped his hat to strangers and mumbled apologies for things that weren't his fault. Life had beaten him into a state of silent endurance, one unpaid bill and one missed opportunity at a time. But even he didn't think he'd end up here, pacing the worn floorboards of his living room, hands shaking, heart pounding, while his wife slept 2 doors down, unaware that her world was about to be shattered. He told himself it was just a night, just a transaction, just a temporary stain he could wash away. He told himself a lot of things. He never told Lena. The night it happened, the air was heavier than usual. Texas cold had a way of crawling under your skin, especially in old homes like theirs, where insulation was more dream than reality. Eddie had left the front porch light on, a signal they had agreed, and waited in the kitchen, trying not to vomit. Frank Doyle showed up like he always did, smug, reeking of sweat and motor oil, a half-burned cigarette dangling from his lip. He didn't say a word, just gave Eddie a look, one that said, "We had a deal," and walked right past him into the back hallway where the bedroom door was still cracked open. Eddie didn't follow. He sat down in the dark and stared at the bottle of bourbon he'd opened hours earlier. His palms were sweating. His throat was raw. His soul was in free fall. And upstairs, something awful began. Lena woke to hands that weren't her husband's. The scream she let out was muffled by the weight of him. Her arms flailed, her legs kicked, but Frank was strong. He whispered things in her ear, vile, putrid things, and told her to stop fighting. Told her her husband had agreed, that this was what Eddie wanted. She didn't believe him at first. But then Frank told her the exact amount of money Eddie owed. And that was when her heart truly broke. When it was over, she didn't cry. She didn't scream anymore. She just lay there, naked, bruised, bleeding, staring at the ceiling like it might open up and swallow her whole. Frank left without a word. Eddie never went upstairs that night. He waited until dawn to open the door. When he did, what he saw would haunt him forever. She was still alive, but barely. Her eyes were swollen shut, her lips split, blood soaking the sheets beneath her. And worse than all of that was the way she looked at him. Not with pain, not with rage, but with a kind of emptiness he'd never seen before. Like the part of her that loved him had been carved out with a knife. She tried to speak. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. She never got the chance to try again, because that night, somewhere between the hospital's overworked ER and the sterile hush of the ICU, Lena Miller slipped away. Internal bleeding. Severe trauma. The doctor said even if she'd lived, she might never have walked again. Eddie told them he found her that way, that someone must have broken in, that he had no idea. But the nurse saw the bruises on her wrists. The detective saw the guilt in his eyes. And deep down, Eddie knew. Truth always leaks out, even when you bury it beneath money, even when you drink it down with bourbon, even when you pray to forget, especially then. It didn't take long for the questions to start. Lena's body was barely cold when Detective Marla Jennings showed up at the hospital. She was one of those women who made you sit up straighter just by walking into the room. Tall, sharp, and not in the business of buying lies. Her eyes scanned Eddie like a microscope as he fumbled through his story. "No signs of forced entry," she said, flipping through her notebook. "No signs of a struggle downstairs. You said you found her like that, in the bed?" Eddie nodded, eyes darting to the floor. "You were home all night?" she pressed. He hesitated. "I was drinking. I passed out." She closed the notebook with a snap. 3 hours later, they brought him in for questioning. At first, he stuck to the story. Some unknown intruder. A freak attack. Maybe a drifter. Maybe someone who knew about the debt and came to collect. But there was no sign of forced entry. No fingerprints. No broken window. No kicked-in door. And Frank Doyle's name was already on the radar. It was the nurse, sharp-eyed and soft-voiced, who first mentioned the odd bruise patterns. "It looked intimate," she said carefully. Like someone who knew her. Detective Jennings followed the thread. Frank was called in the next day. He didn't deny knowing the Millers. In fact, he talked too much. Smug, half smiling, like this was just some backwoods misunderstanding. Poor girl, always so fragile. Eddie loved her, you know. He'd do anything for her. Jennings stared at him for a long time. "You think he loved her enough to sell her?" she asked quietly. Frank froze. That was when she knew. The search of Frank's trailer turned up two things: a stash of unregistered cash in an old ammo box, and a blood-stained button buried beneath a floorboard that matched the blouse Lena had worn that night. But even with evidence, it wasn't enough. Not yet. They needed Eddie to talk. For 3 days, he sat in the county jail. No charges filed. Just for questioning. He didn't eat, didn't sleep. The bourbon sweated out of his body like poison. The guilt festered in his stomach like rot. And then, on the 4th night, he asked for a pen and paper. What he wrote was less a confession and more a prayer. A broken man's attempt to find some kind of peace before the darkness swallowed him whole. He admitted to everything: the debt, the deal, the night he left the porch light on. He even described the moment he knew she was dying. Not her body, but her soul. "She looked at me like I was a stranger," he wrote, "like the man she married had died long before she did." When Jennings read the letter, she didn't say anything for a long time. She just folded it gently and put it in her coat pocket. Then, she went to arrest Frank Doyle for first-degree sexual assault and murder. When they cuffed him, Frank didn't scream, didn't fight, just looked at Eddie across the parking lot of the sheriff's office and said, "We had a deal." Eddie didn't answer. Some debts, he knew now, can never be paid off. The courtroom smelled like old wood and cold coffee. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the Travis County Courthouse, but it didn't warm the air. The silence was thick, choking, like dust in a dry attic. People came early that day, some out of curiosity, others out of disgust. Small-town justice always drew a crowd. Frank Doyle sat at the defense table in a cheap gray suit that didn't quite fit. His greasy hair slicked back like he thought it still made him look respectable. But no suit in the world could wash the filth off that man. Across the aisle, Eddie sat pale and silent. He wasn't a defendant, not officially, not after his cooperation. But the room looked at him the same way they looked at Frank, like he was something broken, something rotting from the inside. When the prosecution played the confession letter, the room held its breath. Eddie had written it by hand, shaking and raw, every word etched with shame. "She looked at me," the letter read, "like I'd sold not just her body, but her soul." Gasps. A few people turned away. One woman in the front row started crying. Then came the photos, the ones taken in the ER, the bruises, the blood, the terror frozen in Lena's eyes. One juror stood up and walked out. Frank showed no emotion, not a twitch, not a blink, just stared straight ahead, like he was already halfway to hell and didn't care. Eddie did cry, though, not loud, not dramatic, but quietly, steadily. The kind of cry that comes from somewhere deeper than the body. A grief that eats away at bone. He didn't speak during the trial, didn't defend himself. He didn't have to. His silence was louder than words. Frank was convicted on all counts. The judge didn't hesitate. Life without parole. Maximum security. The gavel dropped like thunder, but justice has strange echoes. Eddie left the courthouse that day not in handcuffs, but not a free man either. People crossed the street to avoid him. Kids stared. Church friends stopped calling. He moved out of the house on Maple Drive. Some say he went north. Others say he lives alone in a trailer somewhere near the state line, spending his days fixing broken radios and feeding stray dogs. There were rumors he tried to take his own life once. Others said he goes to Lena's grave every Sunday and talks to her for hours. But one thing's certain, he's serving a sentence too, not behind bars, but inside his own head. And Frank? He didn't last long in prison. Word gets around fast in places like that. Inmates don't take kindly to rapists, especially not the kind who kill. One night, he was found in the shower block, face down, jaw shattered, blood in the drain. No one said much about it. No one missed him. And the town? The town never forgot. They still tell the story sometimes, over late-night coffee, in whispers, when the wind starts to howl down Maple Drive again. They tell it as a warning about debt, about betrayal, about the kind of silence that kills. And always, they end it with the same question. What kind of man sells his wife to pay a debt? And what kind of monster buys her? Sometimes, evil doesn't enter our lives with a knife in hand. Sometimes, it walks in through the front door, wearing a familiar face, and it whispers, just this once. This story isn't just about crime. It's about choices, the small ones we make when we think no one is watching. Eddie didn't kill his wife with his hands, but he killed her with his silence, with his weakness, with the moment he chose money over love, pride over protection. Frank Doyle was a monster. But Eddie was something even more dangerous. A man who stood by and let the monster in. The lesson here is painful, but powerful. Never compromise the dignity of someone you love. Not for comfort, not for convenience, not even for survival. Because some debts cost more than money, and some silences echo louder than screams. If you ever find yourself at a crossroads, Faced with a choice that puts your integrity or someone else's worth on the line, choose courage. Choose humanity. Choose to protect. And if this story stirred something in you, made you think twice, or simply made you feel something, hit the subscribe button. We tell stories that stay with you. Stories that ask hard questions. And sometimes, stories that help us become better people.